Okay, so the Great Famine. So a famine is an extreme shortage of food. So the Great Famine occurred in Ireland. Okay, and it was basically caused by a disease or a blight in potatoes. Okay, so Irish people relied heavily on potatoes. Not as much today because we have supermarkets and we have grocery stores where we can go and we can buy whatever we want. Okay, back in the old days they didn't have these. Okay, so all you could do was farm the land and eat whatever you farmed. Okay, so potatoes were really easy to farm. Okay, so they grew in really bad conditions. They were perfect for Ireland because, as you all know, we have awful weather. So potatoes are fantastic. And then one year, potatoes started to go rotten. So a disease arrived into Ireland and potatoes started to go off and you couldn't eat them. So it was very hard to grow them then, right? So during a famine, people died from disease and starvation. In the middle of the 1800s, so around 1845, Ireland experienced the worst famine in its history. It became known as the Great Famine. So around 1 million people died, another million left Ireland in search of a better life. So if you were from Ireland and you saw loads of your neighbours and family members die because there wasn't enough food, obviously your first instinct is to run away, isn't it? So they wanted to get out of the country and to go abroad. And where do you think they went? So did they go to South America? Did they go to South Africa? Did they go to Alaska? No, they went to places like either England, America, Australia, wherever they could get a new life, right? And this is why there are so many immigrants over in America and in England and places like that. So that is why we have so many connections around the world, because we immigrated out. Okay, so 1845, the potato blight reaches Ireland. Okay, 1846, the first soup kitchens are set up, so we'll find out what they are. The potato crop fails for a second year. In Black 47, it's the worst year of the famine. Okay, and then in 1849, the worst of the famine is over, but it continued to 1850. Right? So the Black 47 was basically the worst year. The potatoes will come out of the ground black, so usually potatoes are white on the inside, and this time they come out black, so it's awful. Okay, so it meant that you could not eat it, that it was gone off, and as soon as you saw that, you knew that the whole crop was ruined. Because once one potato got it, they all got it, because it was contagious, right? It would travel underground the nutrients. Okay, so land ownership was a big problem in Ireland back in this day. So one of the main causes of the Great Famine was land ownership. Since the Normans arrived in 1169, Ireland had been under Britain's control. So that's the UK, it's England and all that. Okay? In the 1800s, the best land was owned by rich British landlords. They split the land into smaller plots and rented them to tenant farmers. So this is an example of how it was split up. So all of this land, all the green, is owned by the British landlords. Now, people could rent parts of land. So the tenant farmers here, the Irish farmers would rent small plots of land, and that's all they could farm, even though the British farmer owned all this land. And then there was plots here where cottiers lived. So they were people who couldn't afford to rent, and they kind of just squatted on land, right? So poor people who could not afford to rent a farm plot, okay, they were known as cottiers. So cottiers worked on the bigger farms, and in return they were given a simple cottage and a small amount of land. The poorest people lived in mud huts called hovels. So they would live in these small little areas. They couldn't farm this land. They had to farm this land up here for the British landlords. So these lads couldn't keep any of their produce. They had to give it away to the landlord, right? While these lads could keep their own. Okay. So looking at the diagram, do you think that the land was divided up fairly? Okay, so I want you to answer with 3 sentences, right? So 3 sentences for do you think the land was divided up fairly? And then 2 reasons for why or why not. Okay, so 3 sentences. Do you think it was divided fairly, and why not? Okay. And then potatoes and more potatoes. Another cause of the famine was the fact that potatoes were the main source of food for many people. So the tenant farmers and cottiers only had small plots of land on which to grow food in their families. So potatoes were a good choice because they grew even in the worst soils. Like I said, they were great crops to grow because they were so stubborn and resilient that they could always grow each year. And then this is the first time that it failed dramatically. Okay, 1 acre of potatoes could feed a family of 6, okay, including their animals, for a whole year. So that was fantastic for them because a lot of Irish families had really large family sizes. So it'll be up and around the 10s. That's how many children they'd have, because they feared that some of their kids might die when they're growing up. So they had to keep having kids to make sure that some of their kids survived. So sometimes you could have families of up to 10 people. People often had potatoes and only potatoes for breakfast, lunch and dinner. Okay. On the big farms, different crops were grown. However, these were not eaten by the local people. They were exported or sent away to Britain to make money for the rich landlords. So the nice like carrots and the onions and all those lovely different fruit and veg, they would be shipped off to England. They wouldn't be kept in Ireland, right? So no one in Ireland would be eating those. It was just potatoes mainly. Okay. So how the rich and the poor lived. So the cottagers' homes usually have only one room where the whole family lived. So there'd be one room in this whole house, only one family would live there. Sometimes they brought their animals inside to sleep too. So there'd be no room inside there. It'd be full of people and animals. A good cottage had stone walls. Okay, so stone walls here. Earth floors. So they'd no carpet on their floor. They'd no wood on their floors. Is earth. And a thatched roof. So remember we're talking about thatched? So we said this roof here, it's made of straw and it was thatched roof. So it's like layered on top of each other. So it's thatched so the water won't get in. The richest landlords and their families lived in a huge mansion surrounded by beautiful gardens. Their homes were known locally as the big house. So you might still hear references to that to this day, where a really fancy, nice house is called the big house. So that was the name for the house that the landlords lived in. These were grand 3-story houses and a full team of staff ran the house. They were often from the families of the tenants. So people would be working in this house, cleaning, cooking, whatever they could do for the landlords to try and make any bit of money they could to help their families. Okay, so we'll get this up here. Oh, she won't move. I'll get it up. Okay, so examine the evidence. Describe the differences between the two homes and how do you think that the people in each type of house felt about the other. Okay, so for example, in this house, how do you think they felt about the people living in this house? Would they have had similar lives? What would they have for breakfast? How would these people sleep? How would these people, how would they shower, go to the bathroom? So it's 2 different styles of life, okay? And I want you to give 3 reasons, or 3 differences for each. So maybe this house, it would be colder. They wouldn't have the same amount of heating. Maybe they wouldn't have much light. Okay, so there wouldn't be any light in the house. Maybe that they wouldn't have people working for them, while here they would have these people working for them. And then I want you to think how do you think people in each type of house felt about each other? So 2 sentences on how you think these people felt about the big house and how the tenants felt about how the landlords felt about the cottagers, right? So 3 sentences, list 3 reasons for each, how this is different from this one and how this is different from this one. And then I want you to write 2 sentences on how these people would have felt about the rich people and then how these people would have felt about the cottagers, right? Very simple.